Before we start, just take a second, breathe, and listen to this. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I really do forget that game making is also meant to be an art. I'm so wrapped up in the side of everything that analyzes it all and just looks at consumption of the entire medium that I forget that there is genuine artistry to a lot of what's made. And sometimes there are people whose work reminds me that this is the case, and in this instance, you're listening to the work of one of those people. This is the work of the renowned composer Austin Wintory, whose work I first saw and was exposed to with cult classic games that have been released a few generations ago, namely Abzu and Journey. Perhaps it's because I've always felt like music in particular elevates a game more easily than most other components of a game, but I've always stopped to appreciate Austin's work whenever I hear it in a game. You can tell someone is a great composer just because of the little things and the nuances, how there is just a little bit more emotional depth communicated by their work, and the things that you're able to feel, the things that are evoked in you whenever you listen, and whenever you see that music combined with a game. I mean, yeah, it sticks with you, doesn't it? And it doesn't need to be anything in particular. Sometimes it can be part of a structured cutscene in a story, or it can just be a theme from a main menu. I'm gushing about this particular composer because if I hadn't realized that he was attached to the game we're talking about today, I might not have actually taken the time to sit down and play it. The game in question is the sponsor of today's video, Towerborn. To be transparent with you from the start, I wasn't sure I was going to actually accept this sponsorship. When these videos cross the metaphorical desk, there's a process that comes into play, and I don't accept all of them. There are some, in fact quite a few, that I outright refuse because I think they don't make a good fit for the channel. Under other circumstances, I might have just ignored this offer, but then I looked into it a little bit and did my research and asked more about the offer, and I realized that Austin was the composer for Towerborn. I'm a habitual follower of his work, just due to how much I've loved it in the past, and so, well, there wasn't much more to it than that. I just had to accept. I'm also a sucker for any developer that takes their time to communicate with me and my team like we're real human beings. Sometimes we are told that, of course, we are their favorite content creators, yada yada yada, after we have clearly just been one of a massive list of people that are cold called. And in other instances, even when we have taken big sponsorships, sometimes from big developers and publishers, it has seemed as though we're communicating with an AI as opposed to a real person. Stoic have been the exact opposite of that. Now, don't get me wrong, there are other sponsored videos on Towerborn out there, but according to my team at Mythic, the studio creating Towerborn, Stoic, well, they tried to reach out for me specifically, and having put 16 hours into Towerborn as of writing this, I decided that I want to work with them as well. So today, we're going to be looking into Towerborn as a kind of first look as part of this sponsored content, and we may potentially work with them in the future assuming that all things align correctly. So here's how we're going to do this. Normally I don't do reviews, this is about as close as it gets because they've asked me to put my impressions out there and to talk about what I talk about. I asked the developers over at Stoic Studios a bunch of questions regarding the story, narrative and lore elements of the game as well, and we'll be covering that at the very end because they got back to me with answers. Whilst I am being paid to cover the game, I do still want to give you guys an honest look at things, and in a single word, if I had to look at this, I would say the game is quite charming. In a gaming landscape like today's, it's a breath of fresh air. The vibe in itself, it kind of stands in stark contrast to everything. We have so many worlds nowadays that are filled with doom and darkness, and this time there's a lot more color and hope. To get to a few front-facing basics though, you can actually try Towerborn out right now. I think currently they're on their 8th big patch in this pre-release window, and honestly right now, whilst the experience is clearly not complete, they're offering different bundles of different sizes if you want to become a backer. To cover the game, I purchased my own copy of the Silver Early Access bundle, which was about £22 or $30. Regional equivalents of course may vary. I was sent various Founders Packs, but I bought my first Silver version to get the footage for this video before I had any chance to acquire any sort of key. But what about the game itself? Well, Towerborn is a side-scrolling ARPG beat-em-up in a fantasy world which has seen things gone awry. To talk more about non-story stuff first, I think something people are going to love about the game is the kind of charming art style of it all. I think it would be no shock or surprise to anyone watching any of the footage of the game that its aesthetic draws heavily from the works of Studio Ghibli as inspiration. The world is cartoon in nature, but it's got that crispness to the landscapes that makes you think of Howl's Moving Castle or Kiki's Delivery Service. There's no clearer example of this inspiration than that of the Belfry, the main social hub of the game. I mean, look at this thing. It's a bell tower and windmill on a massive scale, all rolled into one, with a ton of extra scaffolding just stapled and bolted onto the side of it to support everyone that's now living there. It's ramshackle by nature, but it's not grungy. In a world that's clinging onto life, it's not desperate and rusted, it's cared for and cleaned. It's something where there's a lot of love shown to it. This isn't to say that some rough edges don't exist, but they exist to perpetuate that greater feeling of the world as one where life is persisting against adversity and is doing so with a cheer that you can't help but fall in love with. It's a rustic, much less industrialized feel. The way the environments are built outside the Belfry is another great example of this. It's not just good art direction, but it's also clearly rendered with a ton of love. Even when environments are oozing with toxic sludge and swampy biomes, it keeps the same vibrant charm. The forests aren't pitch black, but instead those typical dark shades of mysterious purple. And of course, when that poisonous sludge is on the ground, it's this fluorescent green as if to emphasize the playfulness of the world. The enemy design does a great job of reflecting this too. The way they jump onto the stage from all directions and their quirky movesets only really helps to elevate that playful charm factor even more. As a really basic example, let's look at a very simple enemy. This is a Gobbo. He's not complicated. He's a goblin lizard gremlin thing. But I think he knows that, and he's going to be as archetypally silly as he can within that role. There's something great about that because even when the game is taking itself just a tiny bit more seriously, it's still got these guys here giving little Oscar performances whenever they're defeated. It certainly isn't the only game to have a silly goblin or two. I'm pretty sure it's a well-established trope these days. It's just the way the game executes these ideas that makes it stand out. When fighting these various enemies, you've got 4 classes which you can play, which are based around the weapon archetypes you use with those classes. You can imagine some things being a bit more typical, such as the dual dagger rogue-ish Shadow Strikers and the sword and board Sentinels, but you also have a few stranger options, such as the Rock Breakers and the strange Pyroclasts. They've got this big old hammer mallet kind of thing that you can beat people up with, but you can also charge it up and shoot bouts of flame. It's a really interesting and unique weapon design. Each class has its own moveset that's unlocked with XP and has gear that can be earned from the world. Fairly typical stuff, but even here in early access there's some decent stuff to dig your teeth into, and there's a very big progression to the skill tree that you have across all of the different classes. You explore the world and the game by uncovering tiles. Each tile is either a set, scripted mission, or a procedurally generated one. Some are repeatable, some of them are special boss missions, and in those instances the bosses themselves stand out on the map by being absolute units. Overall, it doesn't feel like anything too groundbreaking, but it's just the fact that it's presented in this gorgeous package and with a world that again, just emits that aura of calm and charm. Based on that vibe alone, I can see why some people might want to pick this up, just so they can have a gaming experience that still has long-tail progression, but requires less urgency and intensity than some other games on the market, just based on the vibe alone. And of course, this is comparing it to other games that loosely identify themselves as looters. Now, with that being said, let's talk story details. You might recognize a few bits and pieces to this if you're one of my regular viewers. The game has a ton of ideas that aren't exactly, unique to its universe, but its execution of these ideas I think is no less beautiful. That being said, hear me out, and let me know if some of this sounds like it's a little bit familiar. In the world where humanity and other civilized peoples wished to find shelter and safety from the monsters of the wilderness, they created the City of Numbers. It was meant to be a place of learning and knowledge and was defended by giant mechanical guardians. However, one day calamity struck and the City of Numbers was decimated. Great chasms opened as the veil between the physical world aka the shore, and the world of spirits, aka the ebb, was weakened. The City of Numbers exploded, and many lives were lost. Things only got worse from here as the beastkin of the world started to become more aggressive and began hunting humanity's remnants. The survivors of the explosion all fled the City of Numbers and returned to the last remaining safe haven in the world, the Belfry. And if this didn't sound at least a little bit familiar to those of you who've played a few other looter plots, there's a little bit more. You see, you play as an ace, someone who's been resurrected from the dead, possibly one of the dead from the explosion of the City of Numbers. You don't remember your past life, and you were brought back from the ebb as a deathless defender of the remnants of humanity. The Belfry isn't just the last outpost of humanity, it's also your base of operations from which you and other aces will strike out. Aces are tasked with defending humanity and the peaceful refugees as they make their way to the Belfry, but aces are also tasked with uncovering what happened in the City of Numbers that caused it to explode. What's more, the various aces of the Belfry have started to attract strange little spirits called Umbra. They float alongside you, but unlike another fictional universe that I'm sure you're all well aware of, they're not just good for occasionally stating the obvious. They have combat abilities and can assist aces while they're fighting against the enemies out in the wild. And as if that wasn't enough, well, they're fun because they come in all sorts of fun little shapes and sizes. They're often shaped like tiny animals that just float along beside you, and each of them has their own unique abilities according to which one you've equipped. So if you're looking at this story, there are some pretty clear comparisons you can make to a lot of post-apocalyptic set games. I mean, undeniably, you're working with some other elements as well that are just similar to other looters. Whether you're looking at Warframe or Destiny. I mean, Ordis and the Ghost would like a word with the Umbra, or perhaps they all need to join a union together, I don't know. I think if you're looking for what this game does differently, it again comes down to the vibe and the charming execution of the game and all of its, well, different elements. And again, I think it comes down to hope, too. So, just to give a little bit of comparison, Destiny, the game I play predominantly, is a hopeful universe, but that hope is heavily contrasted with the evil of some of the adversaries that you face. In contrast, when you walk into the wilds of Towerborn, you know that you're not there in some overarching war of grim survival. You're kind of still there for whimsical fun, even though your role is something which the universe handles seriously. I mean, this game literally has a mission where you just defeat enemies by leading them into massive swarms of bees from beehives that you can break. Yes, by the way, bees is a status effect and you can apply it to your enemies to cause damage over time. Stoic understood the assignment on that one. Even with the whimsical tone aside, I don't think this is any reason to take the story of Towerborn any less seriously, or to state that it's any less credible. In fact, I think it gives us good points of comparison. You're taking well-known tropes and you're choosing to approach them in a very different way. The world is post-apocalyptic, sure, but I don't think I've seen many other games bring this kind of Ghibli charm to any kind of level. But I think it's the fact that it's a hopeful and peaceful, for the most part, post-apocalypse that makes it stand out. Even in those moments of combat, there's a playfulness to the game that elevates that tone and sets it apart from a more grungy and grimdark world that might be equally compelling, just perhaps for different reasons and to a different group. And I should say, maybe this doesn't appeal to everyone, but I can certainly understand how some people would be attached to this. That being said, there is a big point to be made about the narrative generally, which is that currently, it's hard to judge it. The game is in early access, and as you're about to hear, the narrative of the game is not fully fleshed out and developed. It is also not the focus of the early access period. So it's not hard to tell that the narrative was not the focus here at all in this moment. There's a lot of text and expository dialogue in the game that gives you a lot of context about the world, but it feels as though a lot of the potential for the story isn't ready to be unearthed in this early access time period. It's a world that is brimming with character and would clearly make a rich setting for a good narrative, but it's currently, well, it's just not there. That's early access. I think the thing that's fundamentally missing right now, early access aside, is the fact that I'm not seeing as many intriguing questions within the world as I might like. Questions are important in any world, I think, because they help to drive the plot forward, And at the end of it, they also create these hooks that allow anyone to get more attached to it. It doesn't need to be about plot, it can equally just be about world building, and both those things are valid reasons for you to stick around and enjoy a universe. There are some obvious questions. I mean, why did the City of Numbers explode? I think that's probably the one at the heart of the narrative. And yet, there are also some others that you can take at face value as important questions too. Why don't all of the Aces remember their past lives is one. And of course, you can then look at everything happening with the spirits. Why did the Beastkin become more aggressive? And of course, was there some nefarious individual behind all of this? For me at least, this is also why villains are so important in stories generally. Their powers, motivations, and pasts are all fairly clear examples of questions that can help drive the plot. 16 hours in, and I don't know what my enemy's ultimate goal is other than garden variety cartoon evil. The world similarly lacks a feeling of history, but it might just be that I haven't experienced enough of the game to see that. And there are some elements to the world that I'm not mentioning, but predominantly I think it's because I don't want to spoil those elements for people. Given that narrative stuff is sort of what I cover on the channel, I sent along the questions that I mentioned earlier to the team over at Stoic, and they were kind enough to answer some of them as a part of the video. So here's a brief summary of the things I learned. The general response included for most of my questions was that the team at Stoic was still shaping the narrative as the game was developing. This isn't surprising, given that it's what early access looks like generally. The early access period was also supposedly focused on refinements to gameplay and combat, so it's fair to say that the narrative is not the major focus of the game at this point in its life cycle anyway. More specifically though, this was a part of the response to my question on whether the team was planning to keep the game as a text-only story, or whether the characters would get some voiceover work done. Credit where it's due, from what I've heard over my decade talking to devs, every once in a while, this isn't an easy thing to get sorted. Developers need to consider things like localization, which means that getting one character voiced would mean paying maybe as many as a dozen or half a dozen voice actors in several languages. It all adds a lot of production value, but it also adds a lot of cost and production time. There's a reason why some games focus on a low number of voiced cast members. The evolution of Towerborn's story is something that is at the front and center of development at this moment apparently, as unsurprisingly the early access version of it is pretty barren aside from NPC dialogue and quests. There are plans for big standout narrative moments within the story. They're just not the focus of the early access period at this time. I also asked what the lore of the game would be like. More specifically, I asked whether it was something which would generally be a bit more accessible to all players, or whether it'd be more like a Soulsborne kind of lore route, where there is an intricate puzzle with various pieces put in front of you, and it's kind of up to you as a player to fit those pieces together. For some, this is an impenetrable form of lore, and for others, it's a really intricate puzzle that feels great to put together generally, and you really always want to be at the forefront of that. The team at Stoic, however, confirmed that they wanted to allow players to engage more openly with the lore, rather than following this Soulsborne route. And in fairness to them, I think that's the right choice given the vibe of the game. That being said, there are some mysteries that the developers at Stoic do want to preserve within the narrative and the lore. It's just that that is not necessarily going to be something that drives the entire focus of the whole of the narrative. Their focus is on making key cast members and characters that you'll find within the Belfry feel meaningful and memorable, so that they can actually impact the journeys of players that they're going on. In sort of the same vein, I asked whether the game would lean into its more spiritual and supernatural concepts, like the Umbra and the Ebb, and the developers at Stoic didn't want to say much, but they did confirm that they will have a major role within the narrative and larger theme. That's a good sign, because it means they understand the more interesting aspects of their game, the world within it, and they're willing to drill down into them, just given the right narrative context and time. Anything supernatural is, by definition, something mysterious, so this all checks out. They also asked about the tone of the game, because it's mostly cheery and charming, but there are some hints to a savagery under it, and I think that's important. And the reason I think that is because, well, hope needs fear, or at least threat, to contrast with, otherwise it really rings hollow. The team at Stoic confirmed that as time progresses, the vibe of the game will get darker as it progresses to completion. Now, to be really clear, their answer didn't seem to indicate that they were going to change from a Studio Ghibli film aesthetic to something you'd expect in an R-rated shooter over this development change, but they did indicate that they would be adding appropriate levels of escalating threat, both within the world and its combatants that you will face. It sounds to me like their aim is for hope to still be at the heart of it all, but for the stakes and tone to make that hope meaningful and to elevate it somewhat. Lastly, I couldn't help but ask a question regarding how closely they've integrated the narrative with Austin Wintouri's work, and I got a delightful answer to this. To quote directly, Austin has been an integral part of Towerborn's development. He spent over 5 years contributing to the game. That alone is great to hear, because some of his work has defined previous projects he's worked on. If you've played Journey, you know what I'm talking about. For now though, if you want to go ahead and play Towerborn for yourselves, you can go ahead and check it out on Steam or on Xbox. On Steam, it's within Early Access, and on Xbox, you can find it as part of the Xbox Game Preview program, which I believe is also accessible if you have Game Pass. Game Pass members do get exclusive perks as well. And even if you do have buddies on different platforms and you have a variety of ways that you need to play with each other, that's fine because the game is crossplay. So yeah, don't let it be a restriction to everything that you might want to do when you're playing with a group. In particular as well, by jumping into the early access, if you feel so inclined, you can help to shape the game's development going forward. And they're at a very interesting juncture within these last few months, so go ahead and jump in if that's of interest to you. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and enjoyed Towerborn though. Thank you again very much to Stoic for sponsoring this video, and thank you very much to you for watching it. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and leave a like and leave your own thoughts down below in the comments. But of course, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me, and that my name has been My Name is Bife. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.